Good afternoon, everybody. Happy Thanksgiving weekend. I am Tina Brock, your host for Into the Absurd, and we're so very delighted you have joined us this afternoon for our conversation with Reverend Josh Blakesley, who I will get to the table here in just a couple of minutes. But I want to send a big Thanksgiving weekend welcome to everyone. If you're coming in on Facebook, live, if you are here on Zoom, thank you so much for sharing your weekend with us. I want to thank Bob Schmidt and Erica Holscher, who are flying this virtual plane today, which they do so beautifully every week. We couldn't do it without you guys. They'll be managing your questions in the chat box. If you have them, please come on in and share this 50 minutes with us. The Reverend Josh Blakesley is here today to talk about so many things of which there is interest on all sides. He is a self-proclaimed theater nerd, went to Northwestern College in Iowa. We'll talk more about that. He is a pastor at the Love in Action United Church of Christ, and he is the founder and director of the Welcome Project in Hatboro, and not in Hatboro, in Hatboro. And let's get Josh to the table and dig a little bit deeper into this wonderful intersection of theater and spirituality and creating community. Josh Blakesley, Reverend Josh Blakesley, welcome to Into the Absurd.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Hi. And you live in Hatboro too, right?
Yeah, there are plenty of hats in the borough of Hatboro.
Like, what was that? Yeah, it made me think of, for some reason, Bill Irwin and bowlers popped into my head at that moment.
That's going to be a new shirt, by the way.
Hatboro.
That's right.
Well, welcome. Let us start not in Hatboro, but in the lovely Midwest from where you hail. But I confess I don't know which state, so let's do that game first. Where were you born and
Sure. It's two states. So I was born in Des Moines, Iowa, but I was actually raised the first part of my childhood in Indiana. So first in rural Indiana and in a place named Romney, which nobody besides the Romney people. Hey, Romney people, are you out there? Yeah. Probably not.
Well, wait, where is it? So I spent a lot of time in Warsaw, which is near Fort Wayne. But I'm going to tell you, do you know where in relation to Fort Wayne Romney is?
I don't think it's near Fort Wayne because we moved from Romney directly to Indianapolis.
Okay.
And then to West Lafayette, Purdue University, where my dad was a student. I lived, right next to the stadium, the football stadium in Purdue University. My house is still there.
Oh, my brother went to Purdue. I just loved being in that part of the country. And I guess that's something I want to talk to you about. And that is you're growing up in that part and then deciding to go to Northwestern College in Iowa. Was there ever a thought to leave that area, or was that firmly where you knew you wanted to be?
That's a great question. I think, so we moved to Des Moines, Iowa, outside of, not in the center of Des Moines, but just on the outskirts. And being, having spent time in the Midwest, cities are much different than on the East Coast. There's no urban sprawl. So we lived 10 minutes from downtown Des Moines, but we were surrounded by corn, right?
Yeah.
That was my environment. I loved it growing up in junior high, high school, so much open space. And the friendships that we had, and just being in a small school, and I loved all of it.
Yeah, me too.
But I just, I always had this sense. My parents were the type of people that every summer we went to a different state. I actually know I've been to every state in this country, and my parents are part of that because we would always go somewhere else, somewhere new. Mm-hmm. And so I had a sense of travel. While I loved Iowa and the area where we were, by the time I graduated high school, I was ready for something different. Now, I stayed in Iowa, though, and I went to a smaller town. I went to the northwest corner of Iowa near South Dakota in Orange City, which is this tiny Dutch village. And here's a funny story. I'll just tell you this. Here's how you know you're at Northwestern. Back in the day when you had, like regular phones, not cell phones, you'd call campus and you wanted to find somebody, like a student. So it would say, press 1 for A through F, 2 for G through Z, press 3 for van, press 4 for the Hague, press 5, it's a true story. So that was my first, experience with that.
Did you find like I did it to be an immensely theatrical place, the Midwest, I mean, in general, where you lived. And if not for, I mean, certainly the country and the land and everything, but also the lack of things
Mhm.
creates this other whole stage setting in which the mind becomes this adventure. Did you feel that?
Absolutely, that's so true. I can tell you. I mean, my cousin and I actually were on for Thanksgiving. We zoomed with my dad's side of the family. My cousin, who's been in England now for almost 30 years, she's a Midwesterner too, originally, and she's a theater professor in England. And we would, from the time we were kids, we would create these elaborate plays all the time for family gatherings, and even Fourth of July. I would create these Fourth of July fireworks shows that had like performance art and music and all of this,
Hey,
and
me too. See,
just
Broadway
parallel
is
worlds here.
waiting. So what's that? Well, I wonder what that is, right? It's just theater
I
needs
think
to
so.
happen here now. Art happens.
I think you're right about the expanse of the space. You don't have urban sprawl, so you're not constantly connected to businesses and crowds of people. You just have open space. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I we would go out and play, and playing for 4 or 5 hours outside meant you just wander around and make up stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't
Did
know how
you?
much people do that now, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the backyard show in the summer where I was always like trying to recruit kids from next door that absolutely whose dad was an engineer and had wanted nothing to do with any of this. And it's like, oh no, you're going to be fabulous at this fire baton thing, you know?
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
so the theatrical part of it for you started early,
It did.
right? Is that true? And then you
Yeah.
decided, okay, I'm gonna go to school for this.
My mom tells the story, that the Christmas pageant in the church, and I was Jesus, and then the hymn where they say, "No crying he makes." I'm like, ah, like bloody murder, and that just put me on the path to theater. I always felt comfortable. I felt that the arts community was the place where I felt most grounded. Even though I was a sports fanatic, still am, played football all through junior high, high school, and some in college. And those two worlds were so special to me. The camaraderie of being on a team in football and being with people who just would do anything for you on that
Mhm.
team, and having that goal together. But then also the same thing with theater. You had these people who may not have been accepted in other channels in school, may not be the most popular kids, but they were talented, they had gifts to give. And when you had this team, you went through it together. From the people walking, up in the catwalks, running the lights, to the people making the costumes and the stage managers and the actors. It was all team. So that idea of teamwork and creativity always sparked interest for me, and kind of led me where I've been.
Do you feel that your time, I was, I love hearing about your work in football or your time in football. And even though I don't pay much attention to it now, in the band front in high school was there. And I always admired, that was to me the true sort of, I just saw a team. I saw a group of people there working for the same thing. And it was just so exciting to watch that happen. Were you the only football playing? Did you play in college too?
I did. I played in college as well. And it was funny. I remember going into my admissions interview, and the person who was helping me and my parents was very kind and nice, but she says to me, "Josh, you can't do both of these things." She says, "Look, you're signed up for the performance choir. You auditioned and you got it. You got a scholarship. You got a theater scholarship and you have a football scholarship. You can't do those three things. That just doesn't happen." And I remember turning to my parents and saying, "But that's what I want to do." And my mom and my dad looked at the admissions officer and said, "Well, that's what he's going to do." In the
So
very
there was
Midwestern attitude.
they were really, obviously it sounds like your parents were very, very supportive
Oh
of
yeah.
all of what you went to. Did you have brothers? Do you have brothers and
I
sisters?
do. Yeah, I have a younger brother and a younger sister, and all three of us were told, we don't care how you wear your hair, what clothes you wear, what you do with your sort of your lifestyle, but here's the requirement: you must do something in the arts, you
Hmm.
must do something physical, whether it's sports or something like taekwondo or whatever, and you must do some type of service, or something oriented to that.
What does your father do for a living?
My father is also an ordained minister, but he
Ah,
also has a theater degree. I know.
oh,
So I don't
that's
know how
so
many of
interesting.
us are out there.
That's so interesting. Well, my brother worked in, I told you for a long time, worked in Wilmington at the the Grand Opera House, and then went on to ministry after that. And your mom, does she have an arts inkling?
She does. She's a dancer, and Irish dance, clogging. She's well versed in all of that. She used to teach it and perform, and now she's a retired teacher. She was a home economics, consumer science teacher for many years.
Oh, wow. Well, so we're back at college with you at Northwestern College in Iowa, and it's Orange City, right?
Yep,
Orange City. And so I'm watching the welcome video and I was saying to you before the show started how it just really made me want to be there. Like I felt like this is a family that is going to allow me to be the best artist I can be. Meanwhile, this is me saying that today in this place and time. But I guess what kept coming up was we value each one of the contributions that regardless of what aspect of theater you want to be in, and I felt that coming through. Is that I'm assuming it was the way it was.
You're absolutely true, right? So I remember auditioning. I auditioned for various schools and some larger universities. You make your act. This is back in the day before technology we have now, but we would make our acting clips, and we'd send those to the school, and then we'd have an in-person audition. And I remember all the auditions were pretty much the same. But then I went to Northwestern, and I start my monologue, and I'm like halfway through it, and my acting coach, soon to be one of my mentors, Karen, Professor Karen, says to me, "Wait, Josh, sorry to interrupt you, but I want you to think about this." And she starts coaching me halfway through my audition monologue. And the way that she coached me was in such a way that I felt like she wanted me to be better and to just do better in the audition and in the scene itself. And I just knew. I just knew in that moment. I looked around at the other students who were auditioning with me, and many of them ended up being my classmates for 4 years. And we all had this same feeling. This is where we want to be. This is the kind of work we want to dedicate 4 years of our life to. And here's what's so special about it for me. I spent 4 years, in the thespian club and, with all the theater majors, with students who had no chance of ever performing outside of the college. They just didn't have the chops for it. They were nervous, they had stage fright, and yet they were part of it too. They were just as important as all of us. They went in other directions. They became teachers or lawyers or doctors, but this experience for 4 years just changed their life, right? And then we had some of us who went on to be in actual movies you've heard of, and stunt coordinators for Tom Cruise, and people who are producing for the Guthrie and theaters like that. So it's just, but all of us were in it together, and it was an ensemble. That's the best way to describe it. All of us who were theater majors, we were one big ensemble for 4 years.
And it sounds like there's a decision made that in the culture of it that everyone is welcome, and whether you decide to go on and be that stunt coordinator or running that major theater, what you all created together during that time sounds like it had that ability to have that not everybody's going to be on Broadway, and that's okay.
Yes, no, that's a great point. In fact, again, back to my professor Karen, I was in Chicago. We were at cattle call auditions, where, for those of you who don't know what that is, it's like when maybe 50 or more theater companies, repertoire companies come from across the land, and you're there with thousands of people, and you've got 3 minutes, and you stand in line, you take your turn, and then they see you, and you either make it to the next round or you don't. It's crazy. It's nuts. We were there in Chicago, and I remember Karen telling the three of us who had gotten into these auditions, she told us, just remember, theater is not about going to Broadway or going to LA and being in movies. It's about the craft itself, what gives you life, what's beautiful about it, what it brings to you. Because she said, whether you're teaching theater, whether you're acting community theater, whether you're teaching theater to kids, that will be more life-giving to you than killing yourself, waiting tables for 10 years in New York City if you never are experiencing that again. Mm-hmm. So it's not downplaying, and I'm not trying to downplay those who do make it, New York or in LA, for sure, absolutely not. But she was definitely preparing us for real life. to say, she was one of those people. She's a great actress, but she realized what gave her the most life was coaching. And so I realized for me, what gave me the most life was continuing to act, but also to create. And for me, creating isn't limited to a stage that's proscenium, or limited to even a career that's theater. So this teaching for me, this mentoring for me, is carried over into all the vocations that I claim now.
But this manifesting for
Yes.
you, creating something. Let's move to the decision for you to go to Princeton Theological. How long after you're graduating from, after doing the Chicago auditions, or was that what was the span there between those two?
Yeah, it was really fast. So I auditioned. Here's a real quick story. It's a fun story. I was with one of my dear friends. She got really sick, like really sick, and we're on the L in Chicago, and she's sorry, but she's vomiting like crazy, trying to hold her hair and take care of her and all this. Sorry, Tina, I have to tell the story.
No. And I shouldn't be laughing at all. This is not fun. Vomiting
No,
is not fun.
but her name is Tina too.
Oh.
So she's probably laughing now too. But I get a call back. So I'm on the train with her, and she's so sick that we know that she can't stay any longer in Chicago. We have to fly back to Orange City. And I get this call back. And I'm like, what do I do? What do I do? I got a call back, and two of them actually. And so in that moment, I had to make a decision. So I'm hearing Karen's voice in my head. I'm like, you know what? I choose my friend. I want to go back to school there. So we go back to school. And then my parents had at that time moved to just outside of Philadelphia in Newtown, PA. And I'd never been to the Philadelphia area before. And so I graduate, I get off the plane, I'm in Newtown. I don't even know what's going on. And then I get this phone call. And it's a theater in Kansas. And they still want me to be a member of the repertory theater. At the same time, I get a call from another theater that's a touring theater. And then I have these papers that I had for Princeton Theological Seminary. And I told myself, I'm like 3 days away from the deadline to apply. And I told myself, I have to write this. And I turned it in so late, and I called them just to make sure that they received my application. And the person on the other line, I don't know who it was, she says to me, well, we do. And actually, we're reviewing it right now. And I'm pleased to tell you that you're accepted. And I went, oh, no.
Oh, no.
Because I made a promise to myself, if you get into Princeton, you have to go. Because I visited the campus prior to this with my parents. And I walked on that campus, and I knew if I ever chance to be here, I have to be here. Just the vibe, just the energy.
Yeah.
Was just, I can't even describe it. And so when I got in, I said, well, I'm going to put that other theater stuff to the side for now. And I'm glad that I did, because Princeton was basically the springboard for me to continue to do even more theater. And so once I entered Princeton and started to study divinity, which is a very eclectic degree anyway, I was still able to perform. And so I got into summer stock in Philly, in Jersey. I was performing more than ever before while I was in divinity school. And then I got involved with dinner theater, and then it just kept going. And Princeton has a theater program too in the divinity school.
There's a program within.
Yeah, you can do shows there as well. Yeah.
Oh, that makes perfect sense, but I wouldn't have thought. Did you?
I had no idea they did. No, I did not.
Okay.
Then I get on campus and I find these other theater nerds around me, and like, oh, this is great.
Because isn't it? I mean, it makes sense though. The two things have such a strong. They just inform each other in such strong ways. I just want to jump back real quickly, back to getting out of college in Chicago and all of that. And it sounds like you were on a real trajectory there. Was the thinking always in the back of your mind that you were going to possibly search, given that your father and whatnot, was that in there? Or was there an inkling of dissatisfaction, or was it's Karen, right? Your professor, was it Karen?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yep.
Was it Karen saying, I mean, I'm just interested in how Or was it literally, it was something I wanted to do. I stepped on the campus and I was like, I have to do this.
Yeah, I was the opposite. My dad would always tell me, don't ever go into what I do. You know what it's like. Never do it. And so I grew up appreciating my experiences in the church as a kid and as a youth, had really good experiences. I'm lucky in that regard, but I never wanted to be an ordained minister. And even when I accepted going into Princeton, that was not my goal at all, because more than half of the students at Princeton Theological Seminary do not become ministers. They are you, Tina. They're Bob. They are other people. They're CEOs or theater directors or teachers or writers. That's what attracted me to Princeton. Is you get this very deep study of world religions and philosophy and social justice and theology and all that, but you also are surrounded by, I was the youngest in my class, and there was one female who was younger than me, but I was the youngest male. I was just surrounded by all these amazing minds who had already 3 master's degrees and all of that. So no, yeah, to answer your question, I wasn't planning on it at all. And in fact, 4 years after Princeton, I was still not planning on that, even though I was working in a church at that point, Presbyterian to start, doing youth and young adult work and still doing theater. But I had never planned to be an ordained minister. That was never my track. It literally just naturally happened. If that even, I know it sounds funny to some who look at this as some sort of thing that happens, but
Well, I mean, it's sense of place. You say, when you walked onto some places you arrive at and there's an indelible mark in your soul that says, I was born to be here right now doing this thing. Why do you think your dad said to you, you know what this is like, you don't want to do this? It sort of sounds like every kid who has a parent in entertainment going, don't do it. If there's anything else you can, yeah.
Right.
But you know what I mean? Was there something specific?
Yeah, sure. It's a lifestyle. I mean, in general, I don't want to generalize for everybody's experience as a minister, but pretty much they'd all agree with me. It's a pretty difficult lifestyle. You're always on call, pretty much. You're also expected to do things that are technically outside of your expertise. Like, we do a lot of counseling when we're really not certified counselors. So we call it spiritual counseling, but as it always ends up being, it's really counseling. And so we end up referring a lot of people to therapists who really know what they're doing. But we're also responsible for, people's lives. Like right now in the pandemic, for example, I mean, I have colleagues in other churches who are my dear friends, and they've lost more than a handful of congregants to COVID. And here in Philadelphia, there are so many churches who are just in complete mourning stage right now. And you are the one that's kind of overseeing this community. You're the one that people come to when they're grieving, when they're angry, when they're uncertain. You're also the one who is not just trying to keep people's spirits up, but also give them opportunities to grow, to be better people. So it's difficult for self-care. And I think that's what my dad was getting at. He never put it this way, but I know that's what he was saying. It's like, it's difficult to practice self-care. And I would definitely agree with that. Then that's why I'm very, very happy and lucky that I had these mentors along the way who taught me a very important lesson, which is always have your feet one in and one out. So I've always done that. I've never been all in the church or in religion in general. I've always had one foot in it because I know how important it is in the world, how many billions of people on this planet practice a religion. And so it has so much importance, right? But then the one foot out, to be in the world, to be in the arts world, to be in the sports world, to be on the ground, on the Market Frankfurt line, and understanding that the world is not this bubble that religion can sometimes be. So those two things have really helped me keep sane and also practice self-care. And that's why I think the other piece of advice my dad gave me when I did decide to do this crazy work is just do it as long as you're still having fun. And the moment you're not having fun, get out. And that's my philosophy. The moment I'm not having fun in this, I'm out. because then I'm no good to anybody, right?
Right. I think that self-care aspect has got to be a really, really
Yeah.
challenging, particularly
Oh, it is.
during this time, particularly. So, so you get out of Princeton, and at what point did you become the pastor at Love in Action
Sure.
in Hatboro?
Sure. So I, after in the Presbyterian Church, still working with youth and young adults, but not a minister yet, formally. I ended up in Hawaii, in Honolulu. Dear friend of mine from Princeton told me, Josh, you got to come here. You got to do this, and you got to switch from the Presbyterian to the UCC. It's a better fit for you. And my partner and I, Maria, we went to Honolulu, flew there, and just like Princeton, we were like, okay.
I was born to be here.
Yeah, I know what everybody's thinking too when they hear this. They're like, well, why would you want to leave Honolulu? Well, like any place, it has its good and its bad, right? So we loved Honolulu, the culture, the people, the food. It's amazing. So Honolulu was my aha moment that I could be a minister and still be me and still do all this stuff that I love to do. And it was exactly like that. So it was so I'm so grateful to the people in Honolulu, because they steered me in a new direction, and that direction was working in interfaith work, which changed the way I viewed being a minister. So the way I introduce myself now is, I will say I'm an ordained minister in a Christian tradition, but I will explain for people who care to listen that I work with all faiths, and I truly mean that. Yes, I'm ordained in a particular tradition, but there is no faith tradition or secular tradition that I will not work with. And so even my congregation, Love in Action UCC, is made up of people who are not necessarily Christians. And how did I end up at that in Love in Action is after Hawaii, ended up back in Philadelphia area. There was it's called a conference minister. It's basically a regional minister in the denomination. So there was a position that was created for me here in Greater Philadelphia, and for almost 4 years I was doing that with youth and young adults in most of Pennsylvania and a little bit of national work as well. Really enjoyed it, and that solidified me, in the UCC, and I really, really enjoyed it. And then it led me to Love and Action in this community, and knowing that I wanted to create something different. And that's and I can't take credit for it myself. It's a community creation, because we all got together, and after selling a building that was a churchy building with a steeple and pews and all that, and in Oregon, we were all like, this is not us, and the world needs something different. We were noticing that in the suburbs of Philadelphia, there was a lot of I will say just real blatant stuff against certain groups of people. If you were gay or lesbian or transgender, like, you weren't welcome in churches. People of color would complain, about certain churches that they just weren't welcomed in either. People who spoke other languages, just stuff that you go, why? But it was happening, and it still happens, by the way. So we thought, we need to be different. We need to look different, so people are not afraid, and also so that they feel like they can just be accepted. So we moved to a space that doesn't look like a church. It's not a church. It's a building. It's mixed use. We have different community groups use it. And of course, we have a new nonprofit in it now that uses it. And it just feels relevant to who we are. One thing I'll point to as well, which I'm grateful for, is when we first moved into that new space, it was right after the 2016 election. And Liz Plank from MSNBC reached out to us. And this is nothing that we planned. It just happened. She reached out to us because she heard that our congregation was waving the pride flag, and that we had a lot of transgender members of our community. And she was going around interviewing, it was called Divided States of Women. And she wanted to interview different communities of women and how they were adjusting to different, aspects of life in this era. And so she wanted to interview a transgender woman. And so my colleague, Radiance, and I, we were interviewed by Liz Plank about just, what is our church about, and how do we welcome people? And that really propelled us, I think, because we realized, we did this not thinking that we were going to be famous. We didn't want to do that. We just wanted to do this. We just wanted to be. But by doing this, we were relevant. And then by doing this, we were able to create this conversation that was bigger than us, to say, why are people not welcomed? What's behind that? And how can we really get together and as faith communities, but also as secular communities, how can we combat this idea that we're so divided and we can't talk to each other and we can't accept each other? And that moment's really significant for me and for Radiance, who's an amazing person, because it really propelled us towards going even further in this direction.
Is a large part of the work that you do about action in the congregation? Is it about sort of how do you, is there a time you meet every week? Is it on Sundays?
Right. So before the pandemic, we were meeting every Sunday. We have what we call Community Day, which is essentially we would have a very informal worship service where honestly you could walk in and you won't feel, uncomfortable. There's not like really a bulletin or anything like that. If you've never been to a church before and you walked in, you'd have some music, you'd have some conversation, and you'd have some fellowship, right? And then there'd be food. And there'd be a time where people could just share whatever they wanted to. And sometimes it's very vulnerable, brutal stuff where people are crying and emoting. And sometimes it's just celebration. So it's that kind of community. We'll have people walk in the door and that's the only time they walk in and that's all they need. And they feel great and they leave and never come back. We have people who've been there forever. And then the pandemic happened and we've been meeting online in various capacities. But what we've decided throughout this is that every Sunday rhythm on Zoom, it's just too taxing for people. And it reminds them of what we can't do. So I'll be honest with you, we're all struggling through this. So the question we're asking is, what is most helpful for people right now? And what we've landed on is mental health. So we've shifted to say, we're going to put our money, our time, and our efforts into people's mental health. And what that means is we won't do some of the things that we did before. And even when the pandemic is, when we have a vaccine, when we're safely able to gather again, we're still going to do this. We're going to focus on this because that's where people's needs are. I think mental health is directly related to people's spiritual well-being as well. So we offer obviously like online therapy. We also have a variety of support groups that meet weekly and bi-weekly, and then we still do gather. Like we're gonna have like an Advent Christmas holiday cooking Zoom thing together. We'll light candles, we'll do prayer Zooms and things like that. But it's not the regimented Sunday schedule, if that makes sense.
Has the feedback that you've gotten through this time about the services, well, I guess let me back up and ask that question in a second. Is the Welcome Project is a part of Love in Action, or it's its own separate 501?
Sure. Yeah, so the Welcome Project PA is a separate 501c, but it comes out of the work of Love in Action. So for the last 3 years, the main program is called Saga Community Center. Saga stands for Sexuality and Gender Acceptance. It's an LGBT plus community center. We have the only queer library in this area. It's fully functioning. It's incredible what the staff has done. Everything's labeled. You can scan it. People can go online and check out books, and people can donate books. It's incredible. Saga is our biggest program, and they're serving, I can't tell you exactly how many people, but it's a lot of people, with the support groups, the queer clothing swaps, the open mic nights, and the mental health resources. I'm also excited to say we're in 2021, hopefully in early summer, we are hosting the first ever Bucksmont Pride. So we're really excited about that, bringing the community together to do something fun and community building after all this, in 2020. And Saga is just near and dear to my heart because it came out of, this is no lie, it came out of a handful of people who identify as LGBT+, who came to Love in Action, wounded, marginalized, kind of lost in some ways, found their footing, were accepted, and then realized how gifted they are, realized just how incredibly gifted they are. And they're running the show. I mean, they are running the show. I'm so proud of the work that they are doing. and will do. And then I'm also really excited about the other aspect of Welcome Project, which is working with immigrant communities. We offer immigration law to those who can't afford it, but we also just like to provide resources so people have the right information for newcomers in the community, as well as providing fresh produce for families that don't have access to that because maybe someone's out of work or they don't have transportation, and it's just created under one roof. It's created a very eclectic, again, back to this whole idea of like these two worlds together, living together. That's the idea. We didn't want to just be a homogenous nonprofit that preaches to the choir, so to speak. We wanted to bring together marginalized communities of people that may not always be together, so we can realize in solidarity together what we are experiencing, the trauma that we've experienced, bringing that to the table, but then being able to heal from it because we're able to be vulnerable with each other. And that's what it's about. So it comes out of that work, and I'm really, like I said, I'm really grateful to be part of it.
Do you feel that much of the understanding, the healing that comes from the understanding, is that largely an organic process that happens by you just coming together, or are there more specific ways that you program is not the word I want to use, but you know what I mean? Do you make it happen? Is there a script or do you largely come together and let the beauty of that healing happen by just letting people get to know each other?
That's a great question, Tina. It's both and, right? So you have to create the safe and brave space first, always, whether it's online or in person. So I think that comes first. You have to create a space where people feel like they can be okay. And that takes time. Sometimes it takes years for people to just, okay, I'm safe. No one's going to misgender me. No one's going to call me out for what I think or how I present myself. All right, now I can finally say what's going on. But we also have to, as you said, we have specific ways that we know are important to process. And so our support groups are very much programmed. It's okay to use that word, are very much programmed in such a way that they are safe. So there's a process we follow, and those who facilitate clearly do the same process for them. Also, with anything that's dealing with trauma, we are also partnering with Lakeside, which is this amazing organization that is an expert on trauma and healing. And so they have all these trauma trainers and people who know the best ways for us to cope with trauma and how to deal with it. And so we go right to it with them. And so it is both them creating the space, but it's also having folks who have been trained in this, who are wonderfully gifted in these areas, that help bring people out of the cycle and help them progress. And that's how they find healing.
Does that aspect of you, so your role in this is to really put people together and put the ball in motion, if you will, and make the space and make the place for all of this to happen. Is that somehow for you personally the act of creation that you were talking about before? Does that resonate with that aspect, that part of you that might be different than when you're, say, acting in a murder mystery, which I'm going to get to in just a second. Yes. I'm using that as but when you're on stage, you're doing Hamlet or you're acting in a, either way. Is it a different kind of creation that's satisfying in a different way? I
love how you put that. Yeah, I want to steal that. It's great. No, it is. It really, truly is. I am a bridge builder. I am. That's what I know I am to be. And I love to collectively create things, and creating of the spaces is what we're doing now. And out of those spaces comes these, they're called programs now, but they were spaces, and then people filled those spaces. And then out of those spaces that were filled with those folks came these programs. And so, yes, it is about creating. And during the pandemic, we've had to shift to create in different ways. In the beginning, we were all like, oh, we hate Zoom. I don't
Mm-hmm.
want to do this anymore. It's terrible. But then after a while, we realized, okay, we can create, but it's going to be different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's theatrical in a different way.
Yeah, it is.
And it presents opportunities, I think, for finding your way to connection in a way that is just wholly different than the way we do it when we fill a space in a
Yes.
room. We've got a bunch of questions down here for you that I'm just have so many that are coming from here. I'm going to get to them now. What makes one ordained minister versus someone with what makes, I hope I'm getting this right. What makes an ordained minister versus someone with a divinity degree, I guess, is the difference there? And would you always be, say, a youth pastor? Could you be a youth pastor forever and never become ordained? I think the question Robin's asking
Yeah.
is there a difference in being ordained versus someone with a divinity degree?
Certainly, yes,
Botch
yes.
that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I actually serve on the Philadelphia Committee on Ministry for the United Church of Christ. And what that means is we vet and interview candidates for ordination. And not only candidates for ordination, but people who are looking to be licensed or commissioned. These are just terms. But essentially, let's say if you're doing youth ministry like I was for many years, I wasn't ordained for a reason because my calling or my vocational calling at that time was to be working with teenagers and young adults. And you don't have to be ordained to do that. Ordination is more of a general kind of affirmation that you're going to be doing more than just one niche. Does that make sense? So when you go from youth ministry to ordained ministry, you'll find that you're doing weddings, funerals, pastoral counseling, spiritual counseling, curating worship services, preaching every week, visiting people in hospitals, going to meetings with other clergy, all of that kind of thing. So it is very different. And every time we interview somebody who's a candidate, we say, "Why do you want to be ordained?"
Mm-hmm.
Like, because there are a lot of some like chaplains who are amazing, doing incredible work in hospitals, and we say, "Why in the world would you want to be ordained?" And then they have distinct reasons as to why.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a clear distinction. Yeah, it's probably why I avoided it.
I think hearing about the essence of what happens for you when you see someone come to come into love in action, or come into um, you know to join you all, and to see the transformation in the sense of acceptance of themselves, or, as you say, get a foothold or find their footing, I think is the way you described it.
Mhm.
That has to be extraordinary. That has to be extraordinary.
It is. It's powerful because I think what we found so many times, and my colleagues in the church would say the same thing, is that it's almost like we speed up a process for somebody because somebody walks in the door and they're already carrying so much trauma. They've already been wounded and they've never been allowed to share that in a safe environment. So here they are, and they're walking right in the door, and we have this open sharing time. And they really, I can, and so they stand up or they sit down and they just tell their story. And some of them cry, and some of them, are incredibly emotional about it. And other people are just so happy they can say it. They can speak the words that they've wanted to say. And so it's speeding up something that for years they've held in. And I have so many stories about people who found, reached out to me on Facebook or whatever. And for up to like 2 years, they were writing me. Yeah, I hope to visit sometime, but I'm just not ready. And then one day they walk in the door, and that's it. Like they don't need me anymore. Once they find a community and
Yeah.
they feel accepted, they're like, oh, I've been here for 30 years. It's that kind of thing. And it's not because we're any better than any other church. It's simply because intentional community, or
Mm-hmm.
I like to call them communities of practice. It's not my term, of course. This is back in my academic times, but communities of practice, as you said, they act. It's action. So
Mm-hmm.
if you say you're a community that welcomes people and loves people and all those things, then just do it. Just act it out. I mean, don't say it. Just when they walk in the door, do it. And when you run into these bumps, which we do every single time, because it's messy,
Mm-hmm.
when somebody, for example, it happens all the time, somebody who doesn't know an individual in our congregation is transgender, they will misgender the person without knowing, and then they'll be politely corrected, and then they're like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." I'm like, "Oh no, no big deal. I'm just so glad you're here." And then boom, there's like a moment of learning that happens, and growth and healing. And we've had so many people going through gender transition, and even right now we do as well. And that is such an amazing, beautiful thing to witness within a community that accepts them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then they change us. Like we are changed by them. We are changed by them. Speaking of creation, we are
Mm-hmm.
changed.
Yeah, very much. Working the opposite way. I was thinking of children, how you learn so much from your children. Will you make a welcome project players? I mean, it sounds like you have so many creative, fabulous in just what you say people find parts of themselves that they didn't know existed or whatnot. And I was thinking then of the aspects of your training in theater and how that how you're sort of a director and and a like um I don't know where this question is going. It's
Well,
absolutely
I hear you. So before the pandemic, we had basically rehearsal spaces. So the theater company I work for, Without Acute Productions, they were rehearsing in our space, and then we were working on a show for Fringe Festival for this year, and we were also working with some other companies and individuals, colleagues of mine, working with our LGBT plus community center. So yes, we were creating something, and we put it on hold for now, but
Mhm.
we're definitely going to go back to it because we want to. We've used our space for poetry nights, for like music, and people do monologues and soliloquies and things like that. So we want to like do more of that. We're doing it online now, and it's not the same, but it's still good. But in the future, we absolutely want our space to be also all kinds of like theater going on in there. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like just the natural next step
Oh,
of creative outlet of is part of discovering aspects of yourself that perhaps have been hidden or that you haven't had access to,
right.
that it just sort of helps along the way. Is there one, this is facile, but is there a, a thing that you take away from your theater training that is more prominent in your day-to-day
Hmm.
collaborating in Welcome Project and in Love and Action? Is there one specific thing that you think, wow, Karen was right about that? Or
Yes, yes. Oh, I love that. Oh, that's a great question. And it's easy to answer because it's there all the time. We're told by Karen all the time in our improv classes, um, take risks and always be yes and people. So those of you who aren't familiar with that concept, when I say take risks, it means sin boldly. So when you're doing improv, when you're playing, as we say, with a character, why would you do this to yourself? Like, why would you do that? No, play with it. So if your line is something as simple as I want a cup of coffee, play with that. Maybe you don't want a cup of coffee. So what does that look like? Or maybe you really do, but you got to go to the bathroom. So what does that look like? Or maybe there's all kinds of scenarios there. But then the last one, which is really key, be yes and. So when you're in an improv scene, the tendency when I work with students, because I used to do a lot of theater sports nights for college students and high school students, the mistake that a lot of people make when they're doing improv for the first time is everything becomes no. Let's go to the park. No, I don't want to. And then the scene just ends. It's horrible. It's nothing to
it's
see
the
here.
dramatic answer, no. Right.
Right. But if you say, yes, and can we have ice cream? Yes. And can we get jimmies or sprinkles, depending on where you're from in the world? That kind of thing. So the yes and is so appropriate in this work because especially in this time when we're all scrambling to figure out what the heck are we supposed to do with this? And nonprofits like ours who are just like, okay, what's next? How are we going to make it through this? So you just say yes and. You say, we're in a pandemic, yes. And that means that. And this is what we do here in this time. And then when we're not in this era, we say yes and. And so when an organization approaches us and says, we'd really like to work with Welcome Project, but we don't really specifically work in the areas you do, but we love what you do. So we say yes. And
there's a way.
yes, yeah. And I know it may sound simplistic to many people, but it really has worked. Really has.
I mean, the simplest things that we learn on the stage, right? And that is, we are collaborating, we are coming together. What happens when somebody misses an exit or drops a line, or like me, like what just happened with that line out there? And you're so dependent upon the people around you to be yes and people, and to understand that it's not I guess it's about the mistake, but it's about the way in which we figure out how we move through in that new moment that comes out of that mistake.
What are the funniest scenes in the history of Saturday Night Live? Ask yourself.
Yeah.
When they made mistakes.
Always. It's the
And they went with
electricity
it.
in the live moment, right?
Yep.
Is that, we don't know what we're going to do now. And that's the brightest spot of the
best speeches you've ever heard, whether it's politicians or great speakers, orators, is when they winged it. And they made a mistake and they had to go with it.
Yeah, there's a question that's looming in the back of my mind that I want to, and I'm going to pose it in the same way to the last one. Is there anything that you took away from the football field that you felt you still might use?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, for sure. Because in football, I mean, even if you don't like football, the deal about football, and any team sport for that matter, but I'll just focus on American football. Because I also like football, the original football. We call it soccer, but American football, even if you are an interior offensive lineman that nobody cares about, nobody knows your name, you might even have your name on your jersey because they didn't give you your name. Oh, it's 78, whatever. But if you don't make the block, the world star running back or quarterback either gets sacked, tackled, or doesn't get the touchdown. That's just a fact. And if you're the fullback, who nobody cares about, like the fullback is just like, yeah, whatever. But the fullback is the one who opens every single hole for the running back and for the quarterback to see the whole field. So in American football, every single person and every single play has a responsibility. And if they carry it out as a team, it's incredible what happens. But if they don't, it all falls apart. And I think that's the beauty of it for me, is I always felt that when I was on that field, even if I was never going to touch the ball, even if I was not, quote unquote, involved, my name was never called, I knew that my job was important and it affected everybody around me. And that's what I feel about my life. And I know I'm not going to try to do the sports metaphors, but the reality is everything that I do affects the people around me in my corner of the world. It really does. And if I do my best to open a space for people and create spaces for people where they feel welcomed and brave, I'm going to feel the same. I'm going to have that same ecstatic joy of knowing that there's possibility for that we're somehow not as divided and polarized as we think, and we can actually be in a community and be at peace. So it all goes back to that for me. And also the last thing I'll say about American football is there's stuff that nobody sees. You're in the locker room, you're in the weight room, you're on the field running sprints by yourself, you're rehabbing a sprained ankle or a twisted knee. Every person who's been an athlete knows this. Those are those times are it. I mean, that's when you learn something about yourself, and coming out of that it's an amazing thing. So even those athletes that never become stars, but they rehab and they come back, or they do the work behind the scenes, it means something to them.
Yeah, that's a great point. The part of getting injured and or just having to come through, having to work through the getting back on the field, in the gym, whatever. I think team sports are so hugely, it's going back to what your parents said about do something that involves physical activity, do something that involves the arts. And I think the way you have crafted your life, that like listening to that calling, knowing when you were at Princeton that the room was, that campus, that town was calling you, and then these ideas that the minute that have one foot in it, have one foot out of it, they all kind of double back on each other. And I don't want, we just have a couple minutes left, but I want to make sure we talk a little bit about the work you're doing Without a Cue productions too, because I think that's so you've had this is how does that provide how do you bring back from the work at the church?
Yes, it's been great. I mean, Without a Cue, I've been there with them for a long time. Tracy, the owner of the company, is a friend and known her for many years. We were actors together before she started this company, I should say. But Without a Cue, what's different about us is that we are actors, that we do have scripts that we memorize. We do rehearse like every other theater company. But when we do shows, we not just have to do the script. We also have to be ready, because the audience can talk to us.
Great.
There's not that wall, right? So it's gone. And so every single show is completely ephemeral, in the sense that you're not going to get the same show. That's why we do have repeats. We have people who come to a show and will be like, why are you coming to the same show again? They're like, because it's different every time. and it truly is. And that's what makes our company so unique. And that's what we were so sad about, when the pandemic happened, because we can't do that type of show right now. But I will tell you, and again, this is my yes and moment. I will not lie to all you out there. I certainly had my low moments during this time, where I was mourning like all of you, and I still have them. So we're all human on this. But I will say that my yes and moment, and where I'm proud of Without a Cue, is that we've pivoted, and Tracy's pivoted. We've done a lot of these online shows that are a lot of fun for those who participate. And then we've done social distance shows. Just finished a run of a show in Old City. That was a lot of fun. We were at 5 historical markers, and we walked around, and we had, period characters, and it was a mystery, and people could scan a QR code and find clues in a secret room, and it was just so much fun. And then we just did a show in a big mansion where they had outdoor seating. It was like a kind of roaring 20s mystery show. And those people were so crazy to have live theater that it was almost too intense. Like I'm not kidding, like maybe like 10 times we had to be
theater.
Like, can you, because you can't, we're wearing a mask and you can't hear us. So but they were so excited. I mean, just, wow, I've never seen that kind of energy. So I will tell you that that was last week. That's probably the last in-person show for sure that I will do for the foreseeable future, which is okay as we continue to plan. And our goal now Without a Cue, and Tracy's goal, is to work towards the spring, and look at the spring and early summer as, wow, people are going to be so excited for this. And now that we are used to wearing masks and we're used to having physical distance, now we can create spaces. We can create spaces where even audience members who may still feel uncomfortable can come. And that's what we're doing now. Before we were cramped into, tiny spaces and hundreds of people. But now we realize, okay, we just got to do it differently. But it's still going to have the same impact. And I'm excited. Of course, I'm anxious, like all actors, to get through this. Much love, all of you out there. But I'm also excited because I think it's forced us to look at what's really important and to say, okay, we don't have to do it the same.
Yeah.
And I'm really honestly grateful that I've been able to do anything, because a lot of my friends haven't, and a lot of theater directors that are dear friends of mine or family members just out of work, So I think we're all trying to do this together, and that's the other beautiful thing about the theater community, is that we try to support each other. So there's been some really amazing efforts, I gotta say, people raising money for other actors who are out of work, people saying, hey, if you need me to deliver you a meal, or whatever you need, just let me know. Like stuff like that is priceless, and it's still happening. So I mean, I'm really again, it's a shameless plug, but for any of you who are hungry for theater and play character, you can do it online now. It's a lot of fun, but also just I look forward to the spring and the summer, and what comes out of this, what's created out of this.
What this time has done to fertilize in all ways, manner, and form of what we do, and things won't be the same. They'll be different and affected because of it. But well, Josh Blakesley, it's been my pleasure to talk to you about all the exciting things that you're doing in the community. We make sure we have everything up on this episode. We'll put it up on Facebook Live. It's up on Facebook Live, but we'll put it with all the information and the links and everything so people can find you at the Welcome Project and at Love in Action. And I just wish you well in the months and the years to come with the work you're doing. It's super invigorating to hear about how you're affecting people in really profound ways that is so necessary in the community. So thank you so much for taking time.
Thanks, Gina. This has been great. It went so fast. Thanks for letting me be. This is a great program. So thanks so much for inviting me. Had a good time. Thanks.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks.
And everybody, I hope that you'll make a date to be in this very same place next Saturday at 5 p.m. when Lynn Denton and Lynn Denton and Christina Brandon Gomez will be here. They are screenwriters, and they have worked together on a collaborative project called The Milliners. And Lynn is an award-winning filmmaker and scriptwriter and artist, and their collaboration, they met at a meeting in Philadelphia of women in film and theater, and they have done an adaptation of an earlier project of Lynn's, a screen adaptation of the story of two artists in Jim Crow, Georgia at the turn of the century. And they're two artists who come together in their love of arts and in working together with the drive to get women to vote. And it's a really lovely story that mirrors their own relationship. And I'm very excited to jump into that next week. So we hope you'll join us. Continue your relaxing Thanksgiving weekend, if you will. Be safe. And thanks so much for being here. Have a great week ahead.